Is it time to cancel the cancel culture once and for all?
So legal analyst Jeffrey Toobin was suspended by The New Yorker and took a leave of absence from CNN after co-workers reportedly said that during a Zoom conference, he was, well, masturbating.
Chris Brown is currently being blasted on TikTok and Twitter after another dark-skinned woman insinuates he told her no darkies at the party.
I feel even like I'm about to be put in the electric chair because I have a friend who many people think is a racist, so that makes me a racist.
What was said that was racist? Dumb question. Doesn't matter. In a moral panic, evidence becomes unnecessary. All one needs is the accusation to burn the witch.
Welcome to the Confident Communications Podcast, helping communicators create the right response at the right time and deliver it in the right place. On today's episode of the podcast, the often mentioned, always feared, public shaming and sudden descent of your name and reputation due to the effects of the cancel culture. You don't have to be a name in the news or a celebrity to take the proper precautions to prevent a public cancellation. But it is the celebrities who offer lessons that prevent or survive a cancellation when their time or name is up. Discussing the current cancellation rules is a writer who knows his way around a celebrity story. David Oliver is an entertainment reporter at USA Today, covering lifestyle stories that create conversations such as diversity and inclusion, and yes, entertainment, music, and celebrities. His recent USA Today article entitled, "It's Time to Cancel Cancel Culture," instead calling it accountability culture. This article questions the motivation behind the movement. What's the real gripe for people who want to cancel people who step out of bounds for saying or doing something that causes shaming into the online purgatory? And also, how quickly it can happen. In fact, at the time of this interview, two people who were canceled for past behavior, Bill Cosby, who was mentioned in the article, and Teen Vogue editor Alexis McCammon, who we mentioned on the podcast, both were uncanceled. Cosby was sprung from prison, and McCammon is now back at Axios as a political reporter. How quickly it happens. But who are we kidding? Cosby ain't ever coming back. Back to Oliver. Now, Oliver's approach has a twist in his story that is right in my wheelhouse, accountability. And that's why I was so delighted to be asked to be a source for his story. Now here's my interview about my interview with David Oliver. David, thank you. Thank you for asking, and thank you for including me in your story. It's time to cancel culture. Call it accountability culture instead. The cancel culture, at least we've been hearing about it, has been around for a while. But what I learned in your article, that it actually came from a song. Is that true?
That is true. It came from a song in the 80s by the band Chic, which I thought was super interesting because it's something that I didn't know either. So I kind of learned about it, through the reporting of this story, which is something that I really like about my work, is that I feel like I can find out a lot of things, through reporting. And then it was interesting because, obviously the term has been so, I guess cannibalized in a way, and it just shows up so differently today. So that was very cool to learn.
Did you listen to the song?
I didn't actually, you know what? And I probably should have, but I didn't because the source didn't tell me the exact song. They just mentioned it was by that band, and I actually didn't go through, and I should have. So that's a great question.
No, that's okay. Well, David, you jammed so much into your article. It was such a good article, but that was a piece of it that absolutely intrigued me because I've read so much about the cancel culture. I've talked about the cancel culture. So much of my work is really shaped around it. And I had never heard that before. And even in your story that you had mentioned, so the name of the song, I believe, if it's the same one, is "Your Love Is Canceled." And I had never heard of that song before, so I had to listen to it. I had to groove out a little. But how she had pointed out in your source was it looked like she was a professor at USC, and she said that it was a part of Black culture and that it was a phrase that grew to symbolize a particular kind of accountability. Was it that quote? Was she one of the first people you spoke to? Or have you always known as an entertainment reporter that the cancel culture was tied into accountability?
It's something that I think I've known and sort of absorbed in, I guess, in the culture as we've talked about cancel culture so much. I think we've always sort of known that it really has been about accountability. I think that it's just that I think at one point I explained in the story too that cancel culture has been, it's been something that people talk about for so many different things. So it's like somebody like Harvey Weinstein, convicted, sexual offender, like is someone who has been canceled in society. But then you also have people who are canceled for like saying something particularly offensive, but they haven't committed a crime. So it's this wide range of things. So I will say that, yes, well, accountability is at the root of everything. Accountability looks very different depending on the situations at hand. And on the internet, I think it's super easy, especially on Twitter, to sort of like attack people for transgressions that have not reached the, I guess the threshold of a crime, but still feel very personal and still are not good either. So it's a very complicated conversation. I definitely after I pitched the story, I definitely felt a little like, okay, like how am I going to approach this? What's the best way to do this? Is this even smart? Like, was this a good idea to tackle it all? But then those are the kinds of stories that I know I should do, is the ones that are really challenging, because that's what people are talking about and what people want answers about.
I noticed when you posted the story on Twitter right away, I'm just someone, I always go to the replies. Before social media, I would go to the replies on a newspaper, and I would look to see what people responded. And some of the quotes said, cancel culture, really? We're still talking about it. But now you said that you pitched the story. Why now in June 2021, when we've been hearing about the cancel culture for a while, what made you pitch this story? What was the trigger?
I think that it was some of the recent stuff with Chrissy Teigen and Billie Eilish that have it was those. I mean, there's always for a lot of stories, we want to make sure there's a news peg for them, that people are talking about something. That's not always a reason to write something. You obviously want to, you can spur a conversation without that, or you can do your own, I guess you can find news before it breaks too. But in this case, to me, it felt like I was hearing about it particularly a lot in this moment, but I also feel like it always comes up too. But it just felt like a good moment where we can have a conversation and put things in context a bit better. People who are Chrissy Teigen, her bullying remarks were awful. They're not the same thing exactly as a Harvey Weinstein, a Bill Cosby. I'm not trying to minimize the trauma that people felt from Chrissy, but just that, it's interesting to talk about and analyze these subjects. And I just felt like it was an interesting, jumping in point here to talk about it.
Your analysis in this story is excellent, because you are clarifying just what you said right now. The cancel culture is like this overarching theme, but there's a number of different sins that fall under the cancel culture. Tell me, what is that? Should a Harvey Weinstein, quote unquote, be canceled, or is he something different altogether? Like, of all the people, all the suspects you mentioned, Billy Bush, Billie Eilish, Chrissy Teigen, where do people fall? Do you have different subcategories of the cancel culture that you've given a name to it?
First of all, thank you for saying the analysis is excellent. It was really helpful to talk to great people like yourself and others who kind of put things in context for me in that way. I will say, I think, yes, I think that there's, a quote in my story that talks about, it's if you're talking about Best Picture at the Academy Awards versus something more serious, there's obviously different levels to this. And I think that's kind of the point here, right? It's obviously, if someone has murdered someone or sexually abused someone, there's obviously different levels there. I think that if somebody has caused harm online by saying something racist, that's obviously horrible. I think that it did, but that's also not, the same thing as raping someone or sexually assaulting someone. It doesn't mean that it wasn't hurtful, but it also, we're just having different conversations, and the justice system is not, the internet is still so new. I think that it's just, and Twitter in particular, these types of conversations are still so new that it's difficult to talk about. That said, I will say though, that these conversations, didn't just happen online. People were being awful and rude and still are rude in person as well. And it's just that I think you're seeing a lot of people, particularly from marginalized communities, having a lot more agency and speaking up a lot more. And that's sort of where you're seeing, I think, people getting quote unquote canceled when it's like, no, you're actually just trying to hold them accountable for their actions. So it's sort of that is also happening right now as well. So I think that it's easy to, it's easy to point out, and it's obvious that all these things are different, but I don't want to say that in terms of, I don't want to also minimize the harm that people do feel when you see things online that are hurtful or that are homophobic, racist, misogynistic. Like there's awful things out there that people say. And I think that we're getting to a point and have been reaching a point where these things are not okay to say, and they were never okay to say. And now there's a lot of backlash now from a group that was comfortable saying a lot of these things and now are afraid of saying anything. When the truth is the people who are really afraid of saying anything are the ones who are marginalized in the first place. So it's just it's like a flipped narrative in a way that makes everybody uncomfortable and makes everybody angry. But I also think it's signs of progress in that way too. It's just causing a lot of chaos and confusion. And even as I've said this, I'm like, wow, there's a lot going on here.
There is, but you've touched on, even when this is where we align, when you speak about the marginalized, in my world and in my work, and I've been at this for a while, I feel the marginalized, the oppressed, the people who never had a voice, the internet has given them a voice. And even though the internet has been around for a while and social media has been around since around 2007 and the kind of the general online discourse for people to be able to use it, this idea of the marginalized having an authority, if you will, and having a cohort of other marginalized people feel confident enough to come together and lash out appropriately against a person, I think it's just almost like a natural order in a way. And there's something about them having this voice for the first time, which is why we're dealing with this cancel culture. Do you think there's something to that?
I think there is something to that. I mean, I think that people have always been, I think the people who were, I guess, I forget if I read about this on social or it was in the article. Honestly, it all kind of blurs together. But I think there was this whole notion of like, the people who are really canceled and who have been canceled in the past are people who weren't able to say anything at all. So then so when things are flipped right now and like people are saying, oh, you can't say anything anymore, this is cancel culture, it's like, well, that's not really true. So I think, yes, I think it's like a big piece of this is people who have been unable to speak up or were not given space to speak up are doing so. It's definitely made it more of a thing. That said, the term again is like, it came from this, like the roots of like this song. It was used in like throughout Black culture and it's made it to the mainstream. So it's like, even that's part of why the point of the piece, like we should call it accountability culture, because that's what we're really talking about, is I think important. And I wrote another story with a colleague specifically on Black language and how it's been appropriated by lots of, by white people, particularly on TikTok. And it sort of gets at a similar thing. It's like, this is just like one phrase that's been used, but there's so much out there that's been mishandled and misused. And we all should be, taking stock a bit about our language and what we're saying and where we got that language from. You can go down a rabbit hole and find so many different things to analyze, talk about.
Are you working on the story now about appropriating Black culture and the boycott on TikTok?
That was published, I think it was before this one, so a couple weeks ago. Yeah.
Oh, was that a couple weeks ago? Okay, now speaking of, because I went back and looked at your archive of your stories. One, no, this is good. You're an entertainment reporter, but this topic, why did it fall under entertainment to you as an entertainment reporter?
Well, I think, truthfully, like the way our team works at USA Today, we're just entertainment and life, but like life, it's like lifestyle, wellness, like kind of other topics sort of fall into that. So while my title is entertainment reporter, covering diversity and inclusion, I also cover lifestyle topics. So I think this one really blended with both though, because I'm talking about entertainment figures here in addition to, and then it also falls into like a lifestyle type of discussion about the way we use language. So that's sort of how I sort of justified it in my pitch, so to speak. But I think I think you see it a lot in entertainment. Like when people get quote unquote canceled, it's not just in entertainment, but it's where, when you think about this, like people that I mentioned, like throughout this, like Harvey Weinstein, Chrissy Teigen, so many people, they're all sort of related in entertainment world context, even though they're so different and have been canceled for obviously very different things. Yeah.
So you're touching on one of the challenges too. Whenever I speak about it, and if I speak about it off the cuff and I describe what it is, I always default to the celebrities, to the people that we know. And it's always the same name. But the idea of cancel culture, crosses many, many boundaries. You opened your story talking about the political right and how they maligned it, how they appropriated cancel culture themselves, but to use it for political purposes. So what's your take on how the conservative right started using the term?
I mean, I think that it's something that you saw on, I don't know the, exact roots of how it started, but I think it's something you hear a lot talked about on like cable news shows, on like Fox News. People sort of just like have started using it and saying it. And it's become, along with like talking about critical race theory, things like that have just become this like, it's reached a boiling point. I don't know how far it's going to go, but where people are using it as a way to sort of, I think, accuse others of being un-American, accusing people of just not, of trying to cancel everybody, that doesn't fit with their quote unquote liberal progressive views. And it's just the way that the country in general is like, it's get talked about so much, probably sounding like a broken record, but the country is so divided. It's just more ways to divide the country. And I think if more people knew about the root of what cancel culture really meant, and why I hope people read this, is that they'll see that like, this isn't, what you think it is. And I think everybody wants people who do quote unquote wrong things, depending on what that is, to be held accountable in some way, I would hope. And I feel like that's what the point of it all is. And I think that the notion of the way that the way that cancel culture is being used right now is relatively dangerous.
What do you say? Well, tell me more about that. What do you mean about that? Dangerous?
No, I mean that if people are using, if people are talking about it differently and trying to sort of like ignite something or get people angry about something, I think that in general, regardless of what we're talking about, I think that if they're misinformed, then the anger is misplaced and it just creates a cycle of misinformation. And there's already enough misinformation going on in the world today that I'm like, well, I don't know. I think part of my job and part of my colleagues' jobs as journalists is to explain things for our readers and point out what's going on in the world and explain it appropriately. And I would hope that that's the goal of anybody who's speaking in a public forum.
You had mentioned how the right and how cable talking heads on the right are using and misappropriating the term cancel culture. Greg Gutfeld did a rant or a tirade when he was discussing it as it related to Sharon Osbourne when she was defending. When she was defending, oh my gosh, why am I blanking? Oh,
was it Piers Morgan? Maybe
Piers Morgan. Wow, I've never forgotten the name Piers Morgan in my life, but all of a sudden I blanked on Piers Morgan. Yes. Piers Morgan, Sharon Osbourne defending Piers Morgan when Piers Morgan was defending Meghan Markle. He had also pointed out he had used the tone about when people speak about race, then they're canceled just due to an opinion. Like he felt that Sharon Osbourne had every right to defend Piers Morgan. Do you think that's fair when you hear, let's say this is a Greg Gutfeld, so that's a very strong opinion base, but what about when people ask, and I know in my replies, when I shared your article, people replied to me, it's so unfair that some people get away with it, some people don't, some people are targeted. What's your answer to that about the fairness of it?
I mean, I don't have a perfect answer for that. I wish I did. But I mean, I think that the whole point of it is just, you want to hold people accountable, and people have gotten away with a lot for a long time. And I think that it's about sort of trying to, express your opinions and your thoughts. And then, or if it's on social, I think it's hard because it's like you try to hold people accountable, but it doesn't really work unless there's like a mass of people sort of coming together about something. But then also there's like questions about that too. And like, is it right to really bully somebody off of a platform? I think it kind of depends on like quote unquote what they did. But even then, I think it's that has its own problems. Yeah, I think it's very complicated. I think that, somebody like Piers Morgan has such a large platform to do things. I think that's another issue here too, is that like, when a celebrity does something or when a talking head says something, it creates so much influence. And I think those people can be, are almost more accountable in some ways because of their level of influence versus like your, versus like your cousin's cousin who said something inappropriate. That doesn't mean that it's any less like bad, but I think that it's just a big difference in terms of like what we're talking about here. And, I think like your cousin's cousin, your cousin's friend or whatever, you could probably have a conversation with that person and like attempt to sort of like talk through an issue versus like if you see a celebrity saying something bad, you're going to maybe tweet about it. You're not going to like, you can't approach them in that same way. So it does make you wonder about I tend to wonder, I'm like, who's like when people get called out for tweets that are inappropriate, I'm like, who works for these people? And they've seen things that happen. Like, why not go through these people's Twitter feeds and like find all this stuff and like delete it? Like, it just doesn't really make sense to me when like, especially if it's public. Obviously, if there's DMs, that's different. But like, I feel like it just seems like it's a no brainer today. It's like even if like cancel culture was canceled and was over, and like people weren't criticized on social, it's like why wouldn't you just like go through and like just mine social media to like stop these things from existing at all anymore? That's just my little rant about whenever I see like a celebrity get called out, I'm like, why was this still live? Like, why did this happen?
Well, when you speak of platforms, to me, that's another word, for influence and someone who's considered to be savvy online. I ask the same question. Why wouldn't you go through it and scrub it? But I do think that there's a certain amount of, whether it's narcissism or just they have just such a strong sense of self and their brand and the invincibility of their brand, like a Chrissy Teigen, for example. She had a platform, she had influence, and she wielded it in a way to hurt people. What do you think about Chrissy Teigen? Is she going to be able to come back or not?
It's a good question. I think yes. I mean, also Chrissy has done, she's also somebody who is good and has been through a lot. And that photo of her after her miscarriage was heartbreaking and awful. And I think showing people that misery and like sharing that story, I think probably helped so many people or put that into context so much. I think that it's so difficult to like, quote unquote, cancel out, so to speak, like someone's, I guess the good they've done with also the bad. I think it's a thing to weigh. I think that if, it's complicated. I do think that if Chrissy, I mean, I'm no like expert on this exactly, but like if I were her, I would think, take some time away and sort of like reassess what you want. And instead of just these like notes app apology type things, it's like there's other ways to sort of like make good. I don't know if there's some type of cyberbullying campaign or something. I don't know. I'm not a PR expert, but I feel like there's ways that like, you can fix things. And I also think that the truth is it's like some people are never going to forgive her. Some people will never forgive any of us for things that we've done. And that has to be okay. Like you can't just like, that's part of life. No one's going to be able to, you're not going to please everybody. So I think that there's probably going to be a faction of people who will never support her or never anything. But I think that she's someone who has enough fans and has enough influence still that I don't think she's like quote unquote done versus someone who's convicted of a crime or something like that. I think there's a lot, a lot more potential for like, for the person to kind of be out of the spotlight, like Kevin Spacey, for instance, or even like, I forget if honestly, if he was, I think that's like all the crimes are alleged, I believe.
Yeah.
I think that that's even like, that is difficult for somebody to come back from versus, somebody who has said awful things online in the past versus like, versus there being, criminal type of thinking around. So it's complicated and will definitely vary per person. But for Chrissy, I think that there's room for her to come back.
I think there's room for her to come back as well. But you're hitting a low point when Kris Jenner is canceling you from one of her campaigns. Those two were teamed up for a product. They were trying to create their own product line, and she was dropped from it due to her, her spike in her reputation. But I agree with you. She did the correct steps. I mean, she took the time off. She wrote the apology letter. She said all the right things. She touched all the right places. But I do think what her backlash is going to be is I think her reputation will eke back. But financially, I don't think she'll financially recover from what the trajectory that she was on as a brand or as a brand and an influencer. I think it's going to take a while for her to get there.
Yeah, I mean, I'm not sure exactly how that works, but I would imagine that like with some time off and sort of like kind of refiguring out what brands potentially to work with, I'm sure eventually you could end up being a, like spokesperson, figure something out and make it work. But yeah, I think it's also it's interesting because I think the internet, the news cycle, it moves so quickly. But when someone's canceled, I think like somebody isn't always canceled forever either. And you
Right.
sort of see some people, sort of claw their way back into the spotlight. And some people kind of are never canceled, and sort of even if they've done awful things. So, it's sort of this wide thing that I will say though, Kris Jenner, like she's someone like I would never want to cross Kris Jenner. I think
I
like
know.
anybody in this world, I feel like, which maybe, I don't know. I personally, I'm like, no, like that woman, I trust her to I would never want to wrong her.
I was thinking, what would that conversation be like between Chrissy and Kris Jenner? And I was thinking, I bet there wasn't one. I bet Kris Jenner just said, "Ghost, you're done. we're done now."
Yeah.
Okay.
No, she can do anything.
She can, and they will. There will be other iterations of the Kardashians, certainly. Okay, 2 points that I want to make sure that we get to before we wrap up. Okay, so, and I'm going to ask you this as a reporter now, because you had just mentioned some people recover and carry on from the cancellation, others don't. Alexi McCammon, she was a reporter with Axios. She had covered the Biden campaign, and she was picked to be the Teen Vogue editor. And she only was in that post for a matter of days until reports that she had in her Twitter feed when she was in college. She spoke out. She made racist comments, disparaging comments that current Teen Vogue staffers saw and shared. She seems to be someone that is in exile. So as a reporter, what do you think about those tweets that happened in college and she's still sitting on the sidelines?
It's so complicated. I think that, I don't know the exact right answer to this. I will say my feelings on it are, it goes back to, again, why didn't nobody should be thinking any of these things that she said were awful. I think it's important for everybody to make sure that what they share on social media, period, is, appropriate. I think that in the year those were tweeted, I'm not saying they were correct. They were obviously horrendous things to say. I think the barometer for what people could say online was very different. Also, she was a college student. She was not a working professional. That said, I think when you're elevated to a position like hers at Teen Vogue, and then there's this whole mission of diversity and inclusion, and you say something that's racist, I mean, what did you expect was going to happen? To some degree, I think that there's people, do need to be held accountable for things, but I do think it's complicated. I think there's room for people to grow and to learn. I don't think that she is somebody who I believe is either my age or younger than me. Like, there's room for her, I think, to still grow and, figure things out. I don't think that person is done forever. I think that's something that shouldn't happen exactly. But I do think that when you reach a certain level of your career, or you have, you're put in a position of power, like that was a position of power, like you are going to be held accountable for things that you've done. I think that it's complicated right now as we think about like things we've done in the past, and as they bubble up, it's a lot easier to find out things that happened in your past now more than ever because of social. And I think this is going to honestly probably keep happening for millennials, for Gen Z in particular. Like as you go out into the world, things that you did online are probably going to come back to you because people will find them when you reach certain levels. So I think it just sort of behooves everybody to kind of be monitoring what they're putting out. And I view, even if things are private, like if your platforms are private, I always err on the side of somebody's going to see this. So like just be comfortable with what you're sharing. And also occasionally, like, I don't know, go through tweets, go through your Facebook posts. Like, are there any weird pictures you're tagging that you feel uncomfortable with? Like now, like there's ways I think to handle it. And I don't know. I think that I'm a person who generally, I think like I want to wish people well and that they can hopefully get better. I think generally I think that. So I hope that this taught Alexi a lesson. I hope that she kind of figures things out. But I also think that at this point, it's like not really our business anymore. Like I kind of feel like in general, she's someone who she's not at the level of celebrity that other people are. Like she's a reporter, she's a human. Celebrities are human as well, to be clear, but like not the level. And I think that she deserves I think that she can have some grace to sort of figure things out. She did apologize. I'm not totally I do not defend or condone what she did, but I think that there's some room for growth.
Oh, absolutely. And someone like an Alexis is not, we don't know at least, where is she employed? Is she employed? I mean, she really took a hit to the pocketbook, certainly with that, not just reputation, but the bottom line. But now you mentioned when someone is at a certain level, you have Jeffrey Toobin, who now is returning to CNN after he was caught masturbating on a Zoom call with his coworkers, which I think without a doubt crosses a line beyond. And now Jeffrey Toobin is back on the air. What do you think of that?
Ugh, I don't understand that one. I feel like that's pretty clear. Like, you need to not be. I was very shocked to see him on air. I think it's very strange. I think I said this at the time that, like, if a woman or a woman of color had done the same thing that he did in some way, that person would be blacklisted from any job forever. But the fact that he, like, this white man is getting this, he's getting his platform again to speak and say what he wants. I think that's very telling, and of where, of what happened. Like, I think I find that very telling. So that's sort of my view on that, is just like, I think that he has a certain level of influence and is going to be able to keep getting jobs because of his privileges. And that's unfortunate. And I hope that we can learn a lesson from this incident and understand it in that context. But yeah, I think it's incredibly inappropriate what happened. And that's something that, I don't know. I'm not in charge. I'm not making those choices, but I think whoever is making those choices should think about what, the ramifications of that. And especially as we think more about privilege and, what people need to be, I don't know, like, talk about, like, being held accountable. That person, was not ultimately held accountable for his actions, and he's allowed to go back on TV and speak and kind of make a really awkward, like, oh yeah, this happened. Like, that's so weird. Like, I just don't understand that. It doesn't seem appropriate in any capacity to me.
Yeah, and then Alexia McCammon, granted she was just starting in her career, she has, as a young Black woman, she has to look at this white male, privileged white male, a legal analyst on CNN, who I think anyone could see it and saw that it was intentional what he did. It was a mistake that he was recorded, but it certainly wasn't a mistake what he was doing. And for CNN to let him back on the air makes you wonder, one, what does Jeffrey Toobin know about someone at CNN that he's back on the air? But what makes, is there no other Jeffrey Toobin in the world that could fill that role? Does it have to be Jeffrey Toobin?
Right. I think, yeah. And, like, I think it's interesting of you to put those, to put Alexia and him in context, because it's very true. It's like, if the situation, if the, skin tones, everything were, genders were reversed, I think things would look very different in these scenarios.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Okay. So before I let you go, I have to ask you, because it was one of the stories that you talked about, and, I just have to get your take. You're an entertainment reporter, lifestyle for USA Today. Free Britney.
Oh, free Britney. I mean, I think that what Britney has shared in that court hearing, the things that we heard, were so awful and so upsetting. And I just hope that she gets, yeah, it's hard to know, because honestly, the truth is, I don't know exactly what's going on with her mental health. And I feel like it's something that I hope that she, kind of like her sister was saying, right? Like, I hope she's happy. I hope that what happens to her, I hope that she finds happiness. I hope that she gets what she ultimately wants, and that she is, that she gets the help that she needs, whatever way that is. I think that it would be irresponsible of me, I think, to be like, oh, this should happen. Like, definitely, like, free Britney, all this stuff. Like, I think that I hope that the best course of action for her is, I think it was great of us to see her finding her voice. And I hope that she gets to a point where she's capable of making her own choices. And if that means being out of the conservatorship, I think that's great. And I hope that she's able to do that. Or if there's ways, I mean, there's probably compromises to be made. There's probably ways for this to change. But from what she's described, the first IUD, I mean, it's heartbreaking. If this is, it's heartbreaking. And I hope that she's able to find peace. And I hope that we're able to see her perform and be incredible again, if that's what she wants. I think it's at this point, I'm like, let's hear what Britney wants. And I hope that what Britney wants, she can get.
There's a thread to the Britney story, to your cancel culture story, as it relates to accountability, and even tying into Jeffrey Toobin. You look at the power of Jeffrey Toobin, that he could withstand that reputational hit, even though he apologized. absolutely phoned that apology in. It wasn't genuine at all. And then you have Britney, who is being marginalized by her white male father, Jamie Spears. And if you watch the documentary, I'm assuming you did, about, the Free Britney documentary, it almost aligns to the same piece. Like, who decides which white male is canceled and which white male is unpenetrable? Like, oh no, you can get away with whatever you want. Like, why does Jamie Spears have all that power to control his daughter?
Yeah, I mean, I don't know. I mean, I think that if you think about when he got in charge of that, what was the year 2007, 2008, I think that the world looked a little different in terms of celebrity culture. I think social media was just beginning. And there's so many pieces to this, and that we don't fully understand, that the world was just so different. And I think that, Britney's story and her inability to sort of be authentically herself, even on social, which she's even said that, like, she's sort of been like lying to people about, like, on social, about how happy she is or how well she's doing. I think it's really complicated, and it's another case of unfortunate, it is certain privileges that also, there's so much money at stake with Britney's empire. Like, I mean, I'm not, in no way am I like, it's like, it's so complicated. And I feel like he has access to all this money and this influence. And, he got a judge to agree with him, for better or for worse. And it seems like it's for worse.
It's for worse. It's for worse. Oh, geez. Well, David, thank you so much for taking the time to speak with me on the podcast. I will talk to anyone about the cancel culture, especially in entertainment and lifestyle reporter with USA Today. Your article, It's Time to Cancel Culture. Call it accountability culture instead. Totally jives with my book, is this idea of indestructibility and how you become that way in the public space. The last piece in every podcast, since this book has come out, I always leave an indestructible tip. In other words, what is something that someone can do, a communicator, a manager, someone running their own business, their brand, a celebrity, whatever it is, a politician? What is something that someone could do that would help them become indestructible? So if we're looking at this idea of cancel culture, how can someone become cancel resistant? Like, what would be an indestructible tip to help someone become a cancel resistant person or brand?
I think listen to people that you work with or work for you. I think that, people with different viewpoints, particularly from marginalized groups. I think that the more you listen, the more you understand the world. And I think that can help influence your own perceptions, especially I think for like leaders in a company or something, and celebrities. Like, if you listen to people around you and get different viewpoints, you're more likely to just be a more well-rounded person. So I think that would be my indestructible advice, is to listen, especially to those of us privileged than you.
Oh, that's fantastic. David, thank you so much for speaking with me. It was enjoyable. And thank you so much for including me in your story. It was an excellent piece.
Of course. Thanks so much for having me. And I'm glad we got to talk.
Me too. Thanks.
Thanks.
My thanks to David Oliver. You can find his stories in USA Today and online at usatoday.com. Want to chime in on a thought or have a question about communications or the culture of it? Leave me a comment on my website, mollymcpherson.com/podcast. Scroll to the bottom of the page and you can leave me a voicemail. And I'd love to use it in future podcast episodes. That's all for this week on the podcast. I'll see you here next week. Bye for now.